So we're looking at the command rules of procedural programming. Now, these will vary depending on which programming language you're using, but there are a number of sort of structures that are generally in use. So for instance, if we have a function that we want to call, those functions are defined as such. So let's say we have a function called function1, and if we want to use that function, we will write function1 and then a set of open and closing brackets with a semicolon at the end. Okay, so this is for C++ or C. So the brackets here are quite important because they are the things that really define this as a function or a procedure. If it's a function, we will probably return a value, so we might want to store the value that's returned in a variable. So we could say something along the lines of, if we declare a variable int, let's just call it value, which is a bad name, but we'll call it value, and we can say value is equal to whatever function1 gives us back. So function1 is clearly defined as a function here with the brackets. Now this is a function which did not take any parameters. Some functions take parameters, and the structure or the syntax for functions which take parameters, let's just use the same variable value equals function2, let's call it. We still have the brackets, but within the brackets go the data that we want to pass to the function. So let's say we want to give that function the value 9 and the value 12. Close the bracket and add the semicolon to the end. So we still have the brackets, but this time within the brackets we have some information which will give into this function. So this function, maybe it's going to add these two up or multiply them together, divide them, or maybe it's just data that needs to be stored. But this data is now given into this function for it to use to do some sort of purpose. So that's how we define a function, and we know something is a function because of the brackets, whether the brackets have something in or not. When we declare variables, such as what we've done here, they follow a particular syntax as well, and in this case it's the data type followed by the variable name. So we could have here float, let's see, let's say float distance. Okay, we could have char, let's call it initial. We could have an int, let's call it good old-fashioned age. So we have the data type followed by the variable name. We can initialize our variables, so if we wanted to give our variable a value as soon as we create it, we add that after the variable name and say it equals whatever we want it to equal, 3.25, and again the semicolon at the end. So one is an uninitialized. Okay, so this is uninitialized and this is uninitialized, and this is an initialized variable. The other thing we might want to look at is if we create our own functions, as we sort of have done here, that follows a syntax as well. And the syntax here is where we say what the return data type is going to be. So this function, let's say this, we'll write this function 2. So let's say we're going to have function 2, and in the brackets here we need to say what the data type is that we're expecting, and give it a name. Okay, so we're going to create our function here now, and we're going to have a function called function2. Takes value 1, take another integer data type, and we'll call this value 2. Now let's say this function is going to, okay, so a bit of a comment, add 2 numbers. Okay, so we're just going to add these 2 numbers together, so that's a comment. And so adding these 2 numbers together, because we're adding an integer to an integer, means that the return data type is going to be an integer. So we've given it a data type. Okay, so the return data type, the function name, the parameters. Okay, so that's the structure that we need to use, or the syntax we need to use, in order to describe our function and say what our function is. Within our function we have our code, and our code goes within our curly brackets. So in this case we're going to add value 1 to value 2. So we could just say, we could say return. We can't do it in the capital, so let's say we're going to return. So return says give back to whatever bit of code asks for this function to run. So return value 1 plus value 2. Semicolon at the end. So that's going to take whatever the 2 values are that we passed in, and it's going to return that data to the code that called it. So we have the return data type. So value 1 plus value 2 is going to return as an integer data type. We have the function name, and we have the function's parameters.